If you grew up in the 1970s, you've probably noticed something unusual about how you handle stress compared to people around you. While others seem to crumble under pressure or need constant reassurance, you just keep going. Maybe you've been called cold or unemotional, or maybe people wonder why you don't fall apart when things get tough. Here's what psychology reveals: your childhood shaped a rare type of resilience that's actually becoming harder to find in today's world. You're not cold, you're remarkably self-sufficient. In this video, we explore the 5 psychological traits that make 1970s kids uniquely equipped to handle stress. If you've ever been called too independent, if you felt uncomfortable asking for help, or if you simply don't understand why others seem so overwhelmed by challenges you find manageable, this will explain exactly what's different about your brain. Let's dive into what makes your stress response so distinct. You have an unusually high threshold for physical and emotional discomfort. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you were growing up without seatbelt laws, playground regulations, or constant adult supervision, your nervous system learned that discomfort is temporary and survivable. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, didn't develop the hair, trigger sensitivity that characterizes modern stress responses. This might show up as staying calm when technology fails, when plans change suddenly, or when you're physically uncomfortable. While others panic over a delayed flight or a broken phone, you simply adapt. You might find yourself genuinely confused when people describe minor inconveniences as catastrophic. This isn't emotional numbness or suppression. This is what psychologists call high distress tolerance, a trait that predicts better mental health outcomes across virtually every domain. Your childhood, with its skinned knees, boredom, and lack of immediate solutions to every problem, taught your brain that you can survive discomfort without intervention. That's not being tough. That's having a nervous system calibrated to reality rather than catastrophe. You solve your own problems first and ask for help last, if at all. Here's what's happening in your brains. Your formative years occurred during a time when adults expected children to figure things out independently. This created neural pathways that prioritize internal problem solving over external support seeking. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and planning, developed robust connections because it had to. This might show up as preferring to research solutions yourself, feeling genuinely uncomfortable when people offer unsolicited help, or being the person others rely on but rarely leaning on anyone yourself. You might find yourself working through serious challenges alone, not because you're proud, but because seeking help genuinely doesn't occur to you as a first option. This isn't emotional unavailability or trust issues. This is what psychology calls autonomous coping, and it's associated with lower rates of learned helplessness and higher resilience in the face of setbacks. The difference is that modern parenting emphasized interdependence and asking for help, while your childhood taught you that you are your own most reliable resource. That self-reliance others mistake for distance is actually a profound trust in your own capacity. You can tolerate long periods without stimulation or entertainment in ways that seem almost impossible to younger generations. Here's what's happening in your brain. Growing up before the internet, cable television, and on-demand entertainment meant your brain developed the ability to generate its own engagement. Your default mode network, the brain system active during rest and mind wandering, became highly functional instead of anxiety-producing. This might show up as being perfectly content during long waits, not needing constant background noise or scrolling, or being able to sit with your own thoughts without discomfort. You might find yourself actually enjoying quiet moments that make others anxious or restless. Psychology calls this low novelty seeking, and it's directly connected to stress resilience. When your brain isn't dependent on external stimulation to regulate itself, you have access to an internal calm that doesn't require circumstances to be entertaining or pleasant. Your childhood summers of unstructured time created a mind that can be still without being bored and present without being stimulated. That's not being old-fashioned or resistant to technology. That's having a brain that doesn't need constant dopamine hits to feel okay, which means stress doesn't destabilize you the way it does people who require constant engagement. You work through difficult emotions internally before, or instead of, seeking external validation or reassurance. Here's what's happening in your brain. You grew up in an era when feelings were acknowledged but not necessarily processed through conversation or therapy speak. This created a robust internal emotional regulation system. Your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate emotional responses, learned to process feelings without requiring external input for validation. This might show up as needing time alone after stressful events, not immediately calling friends to process every difficult interaction, or feeling overwhelmed by constant check-ins asking how you feel. You might find yourself actually irritated by the modern expectation to verbalize and share every emotion. This isn't emotional repression or avoidance. Psychology calls this internal locus of emotional control, meaning your sense of emotional stability comes from within rather than from others' responses. The key difference is that you learned emotions are information to be processed, not emergencies requiring immediate external intervention. While younger generations were taught that feelings must be shared and validated by others, you learned that you can feel something difficult and work through it yourself. That independence others mistake for coldness is actually emotional self-sufficiency. Your sense of what constitutes real danger is remarkably different from people raised in more protective environments. Here's what's happening in your brain. Growing up with minimal safety regulations and maximum freedom created a threat assessment system based on actual risk rather than perceived risk. Your anterior cingulate cortex, which evaluates threat levels, learned to distinguish between genuine danger and manageable challenge. This might show up as staying calm in objectively stressful situations while others panic, being willing to take calculated risks that seem reckless to more cautious people, or feeling frustrated by excessive safety culture. You might find yourself thinking that people overreact to situations you consider completely manageable. This isn't recklessness or denial. Psychology calls this accurate risk perception, and it's increasingly rare. When you spent your childhood riding bikes without helmets, playing outside unsupervised, and handling minor injuries without adult intervention, your brain learned what actual danger feels like versus what discomfort or challenge feels like. Modern children, raised with constant risk mitigation, often can't distinguish between the two. Your stress response activates for real threats, not imagined ones. That calm others interpret as not caring is actually a nervous system that knows the difference between danger and difficulty. If you've ever been called too independent, unemotional, or disconnected, now you understand what's really happening. The truth is that growing up in the 1970s created a specific type of psychological resilience that's becoming increasingly valuable in an overstimulated, chronically anxious world. Your ability to handle stress isn't about being cold or shut down. It's about having a nervous system trained by real-world experience rather than protective cushioning. Subscribe for more psychology insights that explain who you really are. And if this brought up difficult emotions about your childhood or how you relate to others, consider reaching out to support. You deserve care, even if asking for it doesn't come naturally.